Welcome to the Rethink Leadership Podcast, available on all platforms including YouTube if you prefer to watch. My name is Jeremy Blain, CEO of Performance Works International, Executive Director of the Transformational Leadership Acceleration Institute, and Managing Partner of Diversity Talent. My aim is to bring insights from leaders, experts, and highly talented professionals from around the world. Insights, stories, and advice from the front lines of modern leadership to engage, inspire, and mobilize progress back in the workplace. Every episode is a learning opportunity for us all. The Rethink Leadership Podcast also supports charities around the world. Each episode is in aid of a cause chosen by my guests, and to date I'm proud to say we've supported over 60 global and local great causes. My guest for this episode of the Rethink Leadership Podcast is David Latten. David is a thoroughly modern leader and Head of Procurement at Logitech, one of the world's leading manufacturers of computer peripherals and software. David's main priority as a procurement leader is to ensure Logitech and the wider corporate sector can deliver real progress towards sustainable development goals, environmental and social governance, and strong diversity, equality and inclusion via their supplier spend. Currently, only 6.1% of the trillions of dollars spent annually go to underrepresented suppliers, despite the best efforts of a growing community of procurement leaders who remain committed to increase supply diversity. Core value for Logitech and a personal passion for David as a modern, enlightened leader. In fact, he's led Logitech's partnering with Gender Fair to launch the Coalition for Gender Fair Procurement with the simple aim of leveraging the multi-trillion-dollar spending power of corporate procurement as a lever to provoke urgently needed progress towards gender equality. As you may expect, David goes beyond the procurement DE&I focus and brings that into his own leadership, particularly around gender equality, as another lever to attract, grow and retain a more diverse, powerful and inclusive talent pool. David, thanks very much for joining me. Please tell us about yourself, your passion, and maybe something about yourself that not many people know.
Hi, Jeremy. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here today. So briefly about me now, I'm Head of Procurement at Logitech, based out of Ireland. Logitech, many of your listeners will be familiar. We're a consumer electronics company founded out of Switzerland in 1981. About me and sort of my journey to where I am today, I think starting from my early days, I was distinctly average, very average at school, not on any honours boards, didn't really fit in well with the sort of fixed structure of academia. And I think, but once I was through that varied career after that, started in finance, brief stint in consulting, and then more recently procurement, as I say. And I think my learning about myself really with that was that I wanted to go from a kind of reporting control function, reporting what a business has done versus being in a role that you can impact what a business might do or could do. And I think that's been really exciting, and I think that's really where I've learned what my passion is. I think it's not quite what not many people know about me, but one of my journeys I think is I had no idea what I wanted to do when I was younger, and I want to sort of impart this on the next generation that not everyone does know what to do. I certainly didn't know until I fell into procurement, and I really did fall into procurement. But then when I've learned when I did that was that the common themes in roles that I enjoy, that there's either been a really acute need to transform a function. In my consulting days, it was, I was going into failing functions or departments that were frankly kind of on fire. Some people would actually run away from that. I found myself saying, yeah, that sounds cool. I want to go in there and see what I can do. So I think that's certainly when I started to learn what my passion was. And then the other sort of side of it would be roles that really offer opportunities to do new ways of doing things, maximizing impact in whatever that role is. So when you roll all that up, I think my real sort of professional passion is to be in roles where there's big opportunities to make a difference. And maybe born out of my really average schooling, I think when it's driven me in some of my adult motivations, I think, and the idea of looking back on my career, believing that I'll be leaving the world in a better shape than when I arrived. I think that's a driver for me on a personal level. I've been very lucky that I'm privileged. Like I was born in a safe country, really great parents, white male. So all the dominant kind of sides of any inequalities. I've been very lucky in that way. I think that, and maybe my sort of very average kind of schooling has kind of driven me to want to feel like I have made a difference, really. So that's, in a nutshell, that's about me, Jeremy.
Right, and that to me, the summary of that is kind of grounded but focus of what you're doing, leaving the world in a better shape. I love that, being a force for good, the greater good, as much as the companies that you're in. And as you were talking, I wrote down here, pioneering to make a difference, taking on new ways of doing things, transformation elements. It's where we play, but it's quite interesting that many traditional organizations and leaders still haven't quite got there in terms of where you are and what you're explaining there. And those organizations and leaders who are like you, who are forces for a better future, you want to leave a legacy in that respect as much as anything else. They understand the need to move fast on both environmental and social sustainable development goals. So
Yeah.
SDGs, you name it, but many still aren't familiar with that. So perhaps as somebody who's passionate about this area, you could explain what are SDGs and why are they so important for corporate enterprise and the public sector and higher education to take note of now.
Yeah, yeah. No, great question, Jeremy. And there's a lot out there on those topics, isn't there? And I think there's so much out there, and different acronyms are thrown out there: ESGs, SDGs. One year it's one thing, another year it's another thing. And I think I get that and understand it, but it's really important to kind of cut through that and sort of ask yourself, or ask ourselves, what exactly are we trying to do here? And if you look at the SDGs, for example, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, created back in 2015 by the UN in New York, I believe it was, setting forward targets that by 2030, we're going to achieve a lot of these aspirational requirements for society. So 15 years to get there, back in 2015. And I think, we're sort of halfway on that journey now. We're roughly around 7.5 years away from that target now. That's the societal goals, but I mean, so what? What can corporations do there? Of course, the impact of corporations is enormous. There's some great work by an organization called the World Benchmarking Alliance. They have this idea of the SDG 2000, which essentially says the most influential companies across the world, they employ millions of people, have trillions of dollars of revenue. Society will not reach goals without these large corporations taking a lead. I mean, if you just, those maths kind of make it simple enough, don't they? Society will not get where we need to go without corporations taking a lead. So corporations need to move. And then I think in addition to that, and almost sort of more exciting than that, I recently read some research from something called the Edelman Trust Barometer. And this really digs into, what does society expect from corporations? Do they trust corporations to act? And the findings from it are really interesting. That firstly, society expect that corporations will act not only on environmental challenges, but also society challenges, equality and the such. And also they trust corporations to act. They trust corporations to act more than any other group. I mean, more than the media, that's hardly surprising. More than governments, that's somewhat surprising, I would have thought. But amazingly, more than NGOs. General society at the moment is asking corporations to make a move, and they trust them to make a move more than they do these other groups. If you add all that together, that there's the obvious truth that corporations can have a massive impact. Society is expecting and trusting that we're going to make an impact. So societies really do need to move on it, as corporations really need to move on it. And then I think if you look on the flip side of it in terms of, where are we now? We're 7.5 years away from those SDGs. Like I say, if you just take one of them, SDG 5, gender equality, which in a nutshell means that all legal, social and political barriers to women and girls' empowerment will be removed by 2030. Where are we now? World Economic Forum tells us we're over 100 years away from gender equality, bearing in mind 7 years from the 2030, 100 years away from gender equality. So huge need to act. We're a long, long way away from gender equality and other SDGs, to be frank, as well. Corporations have a huge power and, frankly, a responsibility to act. And lastly, society, our consumers, our customers are saying, we think you should act on this. And at the moment, we trust you to act on this. All that is a definite opportunity to act. And if companies don't act, then that trust isn't going to last forever. So I think it really is something that needs to speak strongly to how a corporation acts.
And there's a lot of talking the talk, isn't there, David, rather
Yeah.
than walking the talk. And this really is the where you can look at the more traditional leadership companies who are maybe struggling actually about what they do in this area, and then some of the more enlightened modern businesses and leaders or transformed businesses who understand that duty of care for society, for the planet, for all of these different goals that we're looking at. Part of me also thinks, though, that the current brand of capitalism that we're practicing, especially you mentioned the US before, and especially in the US, often that fuels talking the talk. But when it actually comes to balancing that societal purpose, people, profit, we appear in some of these things to be skewed still very much by the bottom line. So in order to reduce that, as you talked about the World Economic Forum, that well, we seem to be 100 years away from one of these targets, the gender equality, but we've said it's going to be 7. If we're really going to change the game on this, then what does need to change in terms of how we choose to do business and the mindset shift, particularly that's needed across shareholders, the executive board who are advising, and the C-suite who are taking that advice into action?
Yeah. I suppose what I was thinking when you were talking there, Jeremy, was that many progressive companies are doing great things. But here's the thing, we can't rely purely on progressive companies. We need all companies to do it. And like you say, it's the importance of the bottom line. And that's never going to go away, because ultimately businesses need to give shareholders a return on their investment. There's nothing inherently wrong with that capitalism, in the sense that there needs to be a return on that investment. But I think the really exciting thing is the moment we're in now, and the exciting thing that will push this beyond progressive companies only is that I really think there is a change happening. And when I say that, the moral case for inclusive, equal workforce and looking to be an ally for the environment, the moral case for all that is obvious. But I think today we're starting to see that the business case is too, by which I mean that if you are a company that purely looks at things through a lens of the bottom line, we're starting to see that that's changing now too. Not just in terms of long-term business sustainability, but even in terms of short-term impact right now. There's lots of evidence that having diverse and inclusive leadership teams now will lead to better performance. Now, I think there was some McKinsey did work about, if you've got at least 30% of your leadership team being women, you will perform better than a team that has less. 10 to 30%, I think. And if you have less, and they'll perform better even than those that have less again. So that will impact quarterly performance now. So I think that's a connection of inclusion and equality and performance right now. One of the challenges that I would have in my team, and I think all corporations have, is the recruiting and retaining the top talent, that war for talent. It's becoming a huge driver now for people deciding where they want to work. They want to work at an organization that's really looking to drive forward these values. So there's really strong short-term reasons why bottom line equals the right thing to do, and that's only getting stronger. And then, of course, sort of longer-term drivers are things like, Gen Z are entering the economy as employees and consumers. Millennials are entering leadership. And these generations really are driving change. Like I said, with the talent, they want to work from companies that are really working with a purpose. They're good for planet and good for people. The current kind of threats and insecurities in the world are kind of some of the worst since, back in the 1960s. But we've also got a generation that wants to change the world for social good in a similar way to back in the 1960s. Progressive leaders have always got this, like I said, Jeremy. I think the really exciting thing is that those really just black and white spreadsheet focus, we need to make sure this works on a quarterly basis now. Don't talk to me in 5 years' time, now. I think that's beginning to get traction now too. So it's not there yet, but it's starting to happen. But I think I like to think of it that soon the idea, and I think you said it in your intro, Jeremy, around there's the triple P, the people, planet, and profit, there's stakeholder capitalism, will really be succeeding at this, where there's no such thing as stakeholder capitalism. It is just capitalism. And I think there's short-term drivers for that some people are getting. And then there's those longer term shifts that if companies don't grasp that idea, then it will become a sustainable business challenge in the next kind of 5, 10, 15 years. So I hope and feel that we are moving towards that at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting that I noticed it in the research that's coming back to us as well, is that employees seem to have more power now than they've had in a long, long time, the power of choice. And the drivers of that choice are moving away from what we may have seen in the past around salary, promotion, career, into, is this the right kind of company? Do they have a balance? And will I be fulfilled in my
Yeah,
career? That fulfillment angle is certainly there. So going back to what you're saying, what's encouraging from what you've been saying there, David, is that the change is happening. Yes, the moral case is understood. We need to move now from allyship, which is more talking the talk, to advocacy, which is walking that talk, and harness that power of the people as much as the ones who are in charge of leading this, so that we can all do it together. So the time for action is now. So I'm going to put you on the spot, of course, and I'm going to ask you just straight out. So how do leaders, particularly who are going to drive this, the engine behind it, if you like, to get it going? How do leaders get to positive action with the employees, customers, and all of the other stakeholders on board?
yeah. When I've thought of how to get to action in my role and my role as part of wider Logitech, I think, there are certain areas that I can have a really big impact. There are certain topics that Logitech can have a really big impact. And it's back to the idea that no one can do everything, but we can all do something. There are 7 billion people on this world. If we all do something, just imagine the impact that comes from that. So I think the first sort of framing I had for it is really find your something as an industry, as a corporation, or even as an individual within these structures. What is your something? What resonates in your industry? What resonates in your role, be that sort of HR, finance, procurement, manufacturing, whatever it might be? Where can you have most impact? I think if you really think about that, if that idea that everyone can do something, I think sort of unwritten in that sentence is make sure you choose your something wisely, because you want to make sure that you're really having the biggest impact possible. At Logitech, when you think about what we do, we're a consumer electronics company. Like I said, in terms of environmental impact, it's immediately things like plastics, circularity, like a lot of what we make, carbon impact in environmental topics. And then that's pretty obvious. On the social area, it takes a bit more thinking about, perhaps. And again, if you think of who we are, we're a consumer electronics company. The real DNA of our company, we're a design company, we're an engineering company, we're in tech. So you're immediately thinking kind of engineers within tech. There's obvious gender topics come there. So I think there's a lot of resonance if Logitech as a tech company speak out about gender in tech and equality in tech. There's a lot of impact there we can have, just in terms of our brand and history, as much as what we can actually do. Gaming is one of our biggest verticals, and again, gaming has had a long history of gender issues, and the wider topic of digital inclusion comes in there too. So they're sort of topics that are really strong at Logitech. So I think once you've worked out your something, anyone listening to this can say, well, what is our company's something? Hopefully they have a pretty strong idea on that. Some people's answers will be different, but you should get that. And then from there, I think, okay, so that's kind of, that's the sandpit we're going to play in, perhaps. What can we do there? And you mentioned it, I think, about talking and rather than action. Absolutely, look at something that you can be authentic, action focused over hollow words, and really try to make a difference. At Logitech, again, how we've kind of tried to be very action focused in that regard is we're the first electronics company to put a carbon label on our products. And when I say carbon label, it literally tells you the carbon impact of that product right from Genesis right through to the end of use. That's what we've done there. We want others to do it with us. When you look at equality topics, we do a lot internally, and then there's an interesting angle here with my role. Procurement is essentially, I'm talking to external people all the time. There are external relationships. We are clients of them. We have a leverage with them. My procurement angle on the equality piece is, if Jeremy's a partner of mine at a big supplier, I can try and leverage my influence to make sure that company is doing the right thing. So we're doing a lot of work around gender fair procurement, which essentially means we go to our largest suppliers, some of which have millions of employees and trillions of dollars of revenue, like I said. We go to them and we look to make sure that they are allies for this cause. So I think that's very action focused campaign. So authenticity and action. And then lastly, certainly a Logitech belief, but I think it rings true everywhere, is if we can all do something, imagine the power if we did that as a collective. We can provoke change so much faster by working together. Many progressive companies doing great things, I think I said earlier, but if we're all doing different things, we'll lose that kind of scale of impact of working together. So find out what your something is, work out a really authentic and actionable way to do something, and then find your allies to make a difference and make a difference quicker. And again, going back to this coalition work that I've been driving, we've started assessing our suppliers, as I say, but our ultimate goal is that it becomes entirely standard that large companies will ask each other, are you gender fair? Are you living up to the UN Women Empowerment Principles? I can't change an industry on my own. We need others to do that with us. And if you look at the tangents between environmental topics and social topics, net zero, for example, is a very well understood aspirational goal. Hey, Jeremy, when's your company going to be net zero? Hey, David, when are you going to be net zero? Everyone kind of gets that. We don't really have a similar aspirational target around equality or gender equality in this case. That, again, is ultimately what we're trying to do here, which we need allies. So I think they're the three things. Find your something, act on it, and work with allies, because you'll make change a hell of a lot quicker doing that.
I love that, and I really like what you're talking about in your own company where you work, Logitech, what they're doing around this, and that is walking the talk. Maybe taking you outside of that, what other companies have you come across, or leaders who are getting this right, and what are they perhaps doing that others may not be, which is helping them make more rapid progress?
I think you probably said it there in your intro, I think, Jeremy, that it has to come from leadership. As with all of these sort of initiatives, it has to come from leadership, and it has to almost come from the values and behaviors of that company, which again, comes directly from C-level leadership. And when we say that, it can't just be a few it can't be a PR campaign, it can't be a few tweets. It has to be, what can we do about some of these topics? And we need to go out there and do it. And frankly, there's a really close link now to sort of the bottom line success, like we were talking about earlier on. So I think it really has to come from leadership, very strategic mindset towards that impact, in terms of everyone in the business can do something around this. Like, again, with the tech piece, I guess, that could be many things. It could be what you do with your products and making sure they're inclusive, your own workforce and, sort of talent, hiring for talent, and then in roles like mine externally with procurement. I think really think about the entire organization as a muscle, about how can we really impact these goals. You won't get it right straight away. I mean, the idea of sort of, having hypotheses and testing these hypotheses, track that impact, really see what does work and doesn't work. And you're going to learn things along the way, because, not everything will work. I think the coalition work that I was talking about is based on the simple logic of, I'm a client, we spend millions with a supplier, I can use that leverage to make sure they move on gender equality. That is true. It would be even more true if 15 other clients were asking the same question. That's a hypothesis, and we're kind of learning that right now. So I think really the time for action is now. That doesn't mean run around like a headless chicken. I think it really means it needs to come from leadership, work out strategically where your business and the entire muscle of your business can make a difference. That's when you really need to get to it. Test your hypotheses, track that impact, act authentically. That's how you make a difference. And if you're not doing that, and you are doing maybe some of that pink washing and greenwashing, that is a risky game nowadays, because a lot of people talk about this. A lot of people expect corporations to act. And I've talked about lots of positives. I do wonder, I think there is a growing cynicism that trust in corporations won't last forever. And the more corporations that are speaking in a hollow way, they will undermine the trust in good companies too. So I think, that has a really that has a really long-reaching negative impact. So I think you really have to act authentically on these things.
Really good. Very, very clear, actually, focused on what they're doing that others may not be doing, to pick out some of these things to be to move to authentic action, I think, as you called it, which I really like. But I also imagine when perhaps even when there is greenwashing, and they're talking a good game, let's say, when leaders or boards or the whole organization suddenly become aware actually of the scope and scale of this, there's lots of moving parts within this to make progress. They may be a little bit immobilized, or they may not know which way to turn to start to make progress. So what would be your advice? Say, look, for those tuning into this, for example, that understand what you're saying, that buy into it, but are somewhat daunted from where to start, what would be 2 or 3 key must-dos and measures to help get them off to a flying start?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question, because going back to that SDG idea, these are really big targets, aren't they? And they're global targets for the whole of society. That's sort of 7 billion people, I think it is today. That's pretty scary. And it's easy for David or Jeremy to be sat here thinking, wow, where do we start with that? That's a really scary idea. And frankly, it is. But I think the if you just cut it down into bite-sized pieces, it's a bit like that cliche of climbing a mountain, I guess, isn't it? That it comes with one single step, and it really is that you need to make that step. I've seen lots of posting out there on LinkedIn and other channels, and they're right that there's lots of posting out there about the world does not need another data set. The world does not need more research. Now, I'm not undermining research and data sets. They're really important, but we know enough to know what we need to do, that idea of a something. So I think it's to get over that sort of paralysis of, yeah, these are really scary targets, I get it, but just boil it down to what is your role, who is your company. There is bound to be something you can do. And I think going back to my early career, it's something that I didn't realize then, that it's all too easy, isn't it? That you end up in this, oh, we do this because it's the way it's always been done, or my manager told me to do it this way. And that's entirely understandable. But I think what we really need is a mindset, and leaders want this, but sometimes they're not too close to some of the more junior roles. What you really want in those sort of people is asking questions. Be curious about, well, why are we doing this, or could we do it this way rather than that way? Can we? And that's in sort of process performance, company performance. But absolutely, it's true for these challenges too. I think that the power of the individual, the sort of micro power that all of us have. Forget about the big scary targets. If we all do our bit, I suppose, to use a kind of a phrase from many years ago, if we can all do our bit, then the big targets should look after themselves. And the power of the individual is amazing. Like, I think with our talent, for example, we're really trying to find women in tech. We always hire the right talent, the best person for the role, but we'll exhaust every option possible to find great women in our tech roles and leadership positions and elsewhere. And there was one example that they just weren't coming into the pipeline, that our recruiters just weren't bringing them in. And Bracken Durrell, our CEO, now he has a title, of course, but I could have done this too, I suppose. He went to our recruiters and said, lots of women are taking these degree courses now. We know there are women in the pipeline. If you do not get women in our pipeline, we're going to fire you. We're going to go to another recruiter. Now, you don't need to be a genius to guess what happened the next time a position came up. All of a sudden, there were lots of women in our pipeline. So I think really just boil it down to it's a mountain. What's your first step going to be? What's the best route to take? And what is that first step going to be? Try and look at it through those lenses, because otherwise, yeah, these are scary targets.
Such great stuff here, David, and it's been a really good, insightful conversation. And from starting with your admission that you were average at school, you are clearly excelling in business and modeling this at leadership level. And that's the key, isn't it? We have to model this, and we have to walk the talk, of course.
We do. So, and the interesting thing there, and this is a way broader point than you or I think, that yeah, I was distinctly average at school. I struggled with academia. My curious mindset was also asking fundamental questions about, well, why should I do this? Or why should it be like that? And I can imagine really irritating for a teacher. but I think the bigger, wider point is there's there's a disconnect between academia, I think, and then success in business roles. That they maybe reward different ways of thinking, and like I say, that goes way beyond you and I. But I mean, my mum always says that whenever, like, my brother was very academic, he went into medicine, and she always says whenever the school rang, we always knew it was going to be about David. We always knew David's done. What's David done now? And that's kind of a funny little story. But I think the really interesting point is everything about my personality that made me struggle at school has actually made me do really well in my particular function in procurement, but also wider corporate roles. And that's a big point if you think about it. There's a disconnect between schooling and corporate world, and I think it's interesting to look at how can we connect those things.
Well, I'm laughing when you're talking there because not wishing to be Monty Python about it, but I was looking up to the average and thinking, wow, I wish I was average. I feel exactly the same. I really didn't. I immersed myself in sport in school, but then seemed to have a different brain on when I entered business, which suited me much more actually. But that workplace readiness is a whole different conversation, and I completely agree with you. So, David, after everything that you've told us, leave us with three, four, five parting messages, and please tell us, for those tuning in, how they get in touch with you, how they link to you to continue the conversation.
I think the quick three things I've really kind of threaded through the conversation, I suppose, Jeremy. But yeah, in the idea of sort of doing a quick conclusion to our chat, that idea of something is really important, isn't it? Everyone can do something. What is your something? Really think about that for you individually, for you as part of your organization and function. What is your something? When you've worked that out, really think about how you can maximize that impact. Develop your hypotheses towards that. But don't be afraid to change either. I think this idea that action essentially means let's test those hypotheses. Sometimes they might be wrong. If they're wrong, don't be afraid to pivot, but test those hypotheses with action. Do it with allies as much as you can to maximize that speed to impact. And always remain action and outcome focused. I think with a lot of these, certainly in sort of the world of inclusion and equity, there's lots of efforts around sort of inputs into a system, but we need there to be an outcome. Society is not achieving SDGs today, so we need there to be a positive outcome. So really remain outcome focused. There's some of the thought processes that I had, and then in terms of your listenership, if all of that resonates with you, and particularly if working around developing gender fairness resonates with you, then please do get in touch with us. Gender Fair Procurement is the website of the coalition, genderfairprocurement.com. We'd love to hear from you. Even if it doesn't, I'd love to connect with you on a personal level, because I think these are really important topics. You can always find me on LinkedIn. But I really just encourage everyone to be thinking about that, because society needs it, the environment needs it. But frankly, I think, a rewarding work life is important to everyone. And if you can do the maths to connect whatever it is you do to doing your little piece of work towards these targets, then that must be an enriching way to spend your working life as well. So I encourage everyone to be looking at it like that. And yeah, pleasure to be talking with you all today.
David Latten, thank you very much for joining me. Goodbye.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blain. Please like, comment and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.